Have you ever wondered what happens when a sequel just doesn't live up to the original? That's the story of the Second Crusade, a fascinating, complex, and ultimately disastrous chapter in medieval history. Stick with me, and we'll unravel this epic tale of kings, popes, and clashing civilizations. To understand the Second Crusade, we first need to rewind to the first. In 1099, Western European knights achieved what many thought was impossible. They captured Jerusalem. This victory led to the creation of 4 Christian states in the Middle East, known as the Crusader states. For nearly half a century, these fledgling kingdoms held on, a Christian outpost surrounded by powerful Muslim neighbors, but their hold was precarious, and the tide was about to turn. The catalyst for the Second Crusade was the fall of Edessa, the northernmost Crusader state. In 1144, the brilliant and ambitious Muslim leader, Ahmad al-Din Zengi, the Atabeg of Mosul and Aleppo, captured the city. This was a massive shock to the Christian world. Edessa was the first Crusader state to be established and the first to fall. The news spread like wildfire across Europe, reaching the ears of the most powerful man in Christendom, the Pope, at the time. The Pope was Eugenius III, alarmed by the loss of Edessa and fearing for the other Crusader states. He issued a papal bull in 1145 called *Quantum Predecessors*. This document was essentially a call to arms, officially launching the Second Crusade. It offered spiritual rewards, the remission of sins to those who would take up the cross and journey to the east to defend their fellow Christians. But a papal bull alone wasn't enough to rally an army. The Pope needed a charismatic voice to inspire the masses. Enter Bernard of Clairvaux. If the Pope was the mind of the crusade, Bernard was its heart and soul. A French abbot and one of the most influential religious figures of his time, Bernard was a gifted orator. He embarked on a preaching tour across France and Germany, delivering passionate sermons that moved thousands. His message was powerful and direct. This was a chance for knights and commoners alike to serve God, protect his people, and gain salvation. His words resonated so deeply that, according to contemporary accounts, he ran out of cloth crosses to hand out and had to start tearing up his own robes to meet the demand. Bernard's preaching was incredibly effective, attracting not one but 2 of Europe's most powerful monarchs to the cause, King Louis VII of France and King Conrad III of Germany. This was unprecedented. The First Crusade had been led by nobles and dukes, but never by reigning kings. Their involvement elevated the Second Crusade to a whole new level of prestige and expectation. It was shaping up to be the largest, best-funded, and most organized crusade yet. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. The 2 massive armies, one French and one German, decided to march overland to the Holy Land. This journey itself was a monumental undertaking, fraught with danger. The German army, led by Conrad III, went first. Their march through the Byzantine Empire was plagued by mistrust and skirmishes with the locals. The Byzantines, wary of a huge, armed Western army passing through their lands, offered little support. Things went from bad to worse when the Germans entered Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Overconfident and poorly supplied, Conrad's army split. He led the main force directly into the territory of the Seljuk Turks. Near Dorylaeum, the very site of a famous First Crusade victory, the Germans walked into a trap. The Seljuk cavalry, swift and skilled, ambushed and decimated Conrad's army. The king himself was wounded and forced to retreat with the tattered remnants of his forces. The Great German Crusade was over before it had even truly begun. Meanwhile, the French army under Louis VII was following a similar path, and they didn't fare much better. Hearing of the German disaster, they took a more cautious coastal route, but they too were relentlessly harassed by Turkish forces. At Mount Cadmus, the French vanguard marched too far ahead, leaving the rest of the army in the baggage train exposed in a narrow mountain pass. The Turks attacked, inflicting heavy casualties. The French army was battered and demoralized. Louis and the survivors eventually limped their way to the port of Adalia, where they decided to sail the rest of the way to the Crusader state of Antioch, abandoning many of the infantry and pilgrims who couldn't afford passage. When Louis VII finally arrived in Antioch, he was greeted by its ruler, Prince Raymond, who also happened to be the uncle of Louis's wife, the famous Eleanor of Aquitaine. Raymond had a clear and logical plan. He urged Louis to attack Aleppo, the center of Muslim power in the region. Capturing Aleppo would have neutralized the threat from Zengi's son and successor, Nur al-Din, and secured the northern Crusader states. It was a sound military strategy, but Louis refused. His primary goal, his vow, was to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He was also rumored to be suspicious of the close relationship between his wife Eleanor and her uncle Raymond. Ignoring Raymond's pleas, Louis marched his army south to Jerusalem, a decision that would prove to be a colossal strategic blunder. In Jerusalem, the crusading kings and the local Christian nobility gathered for a grand council at the city of Acre in June 1148. This was a moment of decision. What would be their target? They had several options. They could have tried to retake Edessa, the original goal of the crusade. They could have attacked Ashkelon, a Fatimid fortress on the coast that was a constant thorn in the side of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Instead, they made the baffling decision to attack Damascus. Damascus was a major city, yes, but at the time, it was ruled by an emir, who was actually an ally of the Kingdom of Jerusalem against the rising power of Nur al-Din. Attacking Damascus made no strategic sense. It was like attacking your rival's rival, effectively helping the person you were supposed to be fighting. Historians still debate why this disastrous decision was made. Was it the lure of Damascus's wealth? Was it bad advice from local lords with their own agendas? Whatever the reason, the target was set. The combined Crusader army laid siege to Damascus. Initially, they had some success, setting up camp in the city's lush orchards, which provided food and water. But the defenders of Damascus put up a fierce resistance. Then, the Crusaders made another fatal error. They were convinced to move their camp from the fertile orchards to a barren plain on the other side of the city, which had weaker walls but no access to water or supplies. This move was the final nail in the coffin. With their supplies dwindling and morale plummeting under the hot sun, the Crusader leaders learned that a large relief army led by Nur al-Din was approaching. Facing defeat and dehydration, they had no choice but to abandon the siege after just 4 days. The Great Second Crusade, which had begun with such high hopes and royal prestige, ended not with a bang but with a whimper in a humiliating and disorganized retreat. The failure was total and absolute. The kings returned to Europe in disgrace. The Crusader states were left weaker and more vulnerable than before. The only real success of the entire endeavor happened thousands of miles away, where a group of English and Flemish crusaders, on their way to the Holy Land by sea, stopped to help the Portuguese capture Lisbon from the Moors. But in the main theater of operations, it was an unmitigated disaster. The fallout was immense. In Europe, people looked for someone to blame. Many pointed fingers at Bernard of Clairvaux, who had so passionately preached the crusade. Bernard himself was devastated, writing that it was a judgment from God on the sins of the Crusaders. In the Middle East, the failure of the crusade had the opposite effect. It was a massive boost to the prestige and power of Nur al-Din, who would go on to unite the Muslim forces of Syria and set the stage for the rise of one of history's most iconic figures, Saladin. The disastrous attack on Damascus pushed the city directly into Nur al-Din's arms, creating a unified and powerful enemy on the borders of the Crusader states. So, why did it fail so spectacularly? There wasn't one single reason, but a cascade of failures. Poor leadership, a lack of a unified goal, logistical nightmares, distrust between the Crusaders and the Byzantines, and disastrous strategic decisions all played their part. The Second Crusade serves as a powerful historical lesson on how high hopes and noble intentions can be shattered by poor planning and human folly. It was a sequel that failed to deliver, setting the stage for even more conflict and the eventual rise of Saladin and the Third Crusade. What do you think was the biggest mistake of the Second Crusade? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for journeying back in time with me today. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please give this video a like and subscribe for more epic stories. See you next time.